Let's waste no time on my introduction. You shouldn't care who I am. While I chat on, though, those of you who wish to follow along can take the time to acquire the WXPython library from wxpython.org and Al Sweigert's Paperclip, which you can get with pip. Perhaps you know about classes in Python, you know the syntax, you know about inheritance, you even know about diamond diagrams and method resolution order. You're fully equipped to fire into object-oriented programming, but really can't see the point. Perhaps you don't. If that's the case, feel free to keep watching. I will be going more over how to use object-oriented programming in a simple, real example than the exact letters to type. I assume there are hundreds of videos explaining self, @class method, @static method, etc., and I'm certain I can't outdo them. You'll see quite a few different pieces of software in this video. First up, my normal IDE, PTVS, or Python Tools for Visual Studio. It'll show up occasionally, but I'll do the actual project in idle, as pretty much everyone knows it and has it. Next, we have MySQL Workbench. It's just part of the demo, so you don't need to worry about it. Finally, we have Works Form Builder. While we can do what it does by hand, so long as you understand the fundamentals, it's much faster and more sensible to use tools to make it easier. If you don't know how to make a Works app in a cave with a bunch of scraps, I can recommend zcode.com/wxpython. Again, I won't go over it in this video because I can't outdo the existing resources. So, as I said, I'll use a simple, real example. In my projects, I generally have a database module which abstracts away the actual SQL queries into simple function calls. I've not yet grown from doing this into an ORM like SQL Alchemy or similar, thus giving rise to my problem. Raw SQL in Python is a mess. You either have one long line, or an unindented block of triple quoted string, or you do what I've chosen to do and split the string up. Typing this is a bother, and I use MySQL Workbench as somewhat of an interactive interpreter for SQL, so if I could just copy-paste from one to the other, it sure would be sweet. I could make something which listens to the clipboard in the background, reformatting it if it looks like SQL, but that seemed like too much magic. Instead, a simple graphical user interface middleman will do just fine. Let's quickly make our interface. Here is Works Form Builder. It lets you visually put together Works applications really quickly, within reason. If you start getting really clever, it kind of falls down, but hey, don't worry about it yet. We'll arrange our program into rows, because it's simple and it works. On our top row, we'll have the indentation level the user wants their SQL at. If they're in a function, it'll probably be 2. If they're in a class, 3 is more likely. Seeing as I'm usually in classes, I'll set the default to 3 in a minute. Next up, the input and output boxes. Very simple. On our last row, we'll put the action buttons for copying and pasting more easily, but seeing as they're less fundamental to the program, let's put a line in there too. Okay, now that's done, let's put labels on everything so the interface makes sense. After that, name everything properly. We'll also set the default value for indentation here. Finally, we'll connect the events. It's pretty simple. Head into the Events tab and dream up some function names to be called when the user does stuff. We'll need events for when they change any text or click any buttons. Sweet, that was pretty easy. Now the real magic. Wux Form Builder has written all this really boring, mealy code for us. The formatting is wonky as hell, but whatever. PTVS can fix that for me later if I care enough. Now we have the code Wux Form Builder wrote on our behalf in idle, we'll want to make a couple changes to it. First up, delete the destructor. It literally does nothing, and I'm not sure why it's here. We've also got a couple comments we don't need. More importantly though, we'll want to untabify the code Wux Form Builder wrote. We can't have any nasty tabs in our beautiful code. While we're here, we could work towards undoing Wux Form Builder's weird spacing, but it would take ages and is boring, so I'll skip it. Pretty importantly, we'll want to import Wux itself, and set up the app which Wux needs to run and show stuff on screen. Let's get some example SQL to use. We can also use this as a user test, because I'm the user. I also want how many images there are on each job. This should do it. Yeah, dank. Okay, so we've got this in our clipboard, see? We'll come back to that. Let's take a look at the event handlers Wux Form Builder connected up for us. As a quick demonstration, here's how they work. Nice and simple. So, when the user changes anything, we'll want to transmogrify their input into output that they would prefer. That sounds like a pretty sane case for a new function. The output they'd prefer, in this case, is their input, with the beginning of each line indented an appropriate amount, every line enclosed in quotes, and a space after each line apart from the last, and a new line at the very beginning for good measure. The first step in this should be the interactive interpreter. Let's temporarily put a really ugly global variable in here so we can muck about with user input interactively, like so. So we have our input, and we want to put an indent at the beginning of each line. With indents 4 spaces wide, here's our string that we'll prepend. For each line, we want quotes surrounding it, and a space after each line apart from the last. This sounds like a good case for a for loop, but let's use strings.replace instead, so we don't have to muck about with the no space after the last line thing. Here's the code for that. Now we're missing the new line and indent before the first line, and the first and last quotes. We'll fix that up by placing replace as output in this string. And done. A couple lines turned input into output. Very tidy. We'll quickly put this in the function we made, and prove that it still works in the actual program. Now for the finishing touches, we'll improve usability and make those buttons work. Import Piperclip and we'll set up the first button first. Okay, we've got our sequel in the clipboard, and sweet, worked a charm. Next up, the last button. It makes sense, trust me. We'll use our first button again for ease of use, and then this one. Did it work? Get over a notepad. Alright, that worked too. So, we want the button in the middle to just click the other buttons one after the other. The simplest way to do that is to have it call the handlers when clicked, like so. But we'll need to make a slight modification to them so they accept no arguments. One last test to make sure it works. And into production it goes. Well, there's your very brief crash course into the whys of object-oriented programming instead of the hows. It was a bit subtle, but I hope you're able to catch how much work we're saving and how much tidier the code is in pretty much every single place the variable self features. Any comments? Just leave them below and boost the hell out of my YouTube rank thing, and I'll be back to you shortly. If this was too subtle, I'm sure you'll tell me soon enough, and I have an idea for a follow-up.